minimise you all, and if I can't, I've got 4 of you now, David, but 4, what a treat. Okay, thanks very much indeed for joining tonight. We were just having a laugh, it was a panic attack about the diploma exam, so I realise some of you are diploma students, so if you had any exams over the last couple of days, I hope they went well for you. Okay, so the second week of the New Zealand wine course. So I felt chastened last week by not being on top of the GI. So I thought to myself today, how do I get my PowerPoint to work? Phew. I thought I'd quickly recap it. So the long and short of it is the Geographical Indication Act was introduced to stop people overseas from using New Zealand terms on their labels in much the same way as the Prosecco producers or the cheese makers have decided to do the same thing. So the geographical indicators, there's a list of them there. So obviously New Zealand is one, and then North Island and South Island, and then Northland, and then there's one for Auckland, and then there are 3 sub-GIs, so Matakana, Kumeu, and Waiheke, and on. So there's Gisborne, and then Hawke's Bay is either 1 for Hawke's Bay or 1 for Central Hawke's Bay, and then onwards. And I asked someone, like, well, that's incredibly strange, because for Marlborough there's only 1 GI, which you feel with its wealth of sub-regions and what have you will be worth doing. But there's a real fine line, if you like, because a colleague of mine did her MW dissertation on, is there a case for sub-regional Marlborough Sauvignon? And it was fascinating to read some of the responses. She got about, she got a massive number in, but there were some people who thought it should be more complicated, and you should go down almost the Burgundian route, where you can sort of identify sub-region and maybe even down to individual vineyard sites. And there were other people who said, no, it's wine. Why do we make wine more and more complicated? Really, on if you're on an overseas market and you go into a wine merchants and you see, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, then Marlborough should be all you need. That's, a lot of the wines are regional blends, so you might find vineyards from Waro and with Aotere and what have you. So it's probably not, it wasn't deemed to be as urgent, if you like, in Marlborough, and also because once you put one of the sub-regions on, you can't put the main region on. So if you put Kumeu on the label, you can't then put anything else. You can't put Auckland. So if you have unless you have a really good grasp of sub-regions, if you just saw a wine label that said Gladstone on it, then you wouldn't know that came from the Wairarapa. So there was this sort of pull or tug, if you like, between people who thought it was a good idea and people who didn't. So obviously when you think of Central Otago and you think of all the key wineries, and many of them are based in Bannockburn, so they felt that it was important to for a region as large and extended and as disparate as Central, maybe that the producers in a specific region wanted to pay to have it done. It's expensive to seek a GI. Don't ask me how much it is. I should imagine if a lawyer is involved, it's really quite a lot of money. But that was there's a push and pull. Some people could see the benefit of encouraging these sub-regions, and some people couldn't. And I saw Lorraine from Valentia yesterday for a tasting, and she said there's 2 spellings of Hawke's Bay. So there's Hawke's Bay 'S and there's Hawke's Bay with no apostrophe. I think the apostrophe S is the correct one. Well, correct, but both are entitled to be used. So thank you. That was a very good salutary lesson for me in learning more about the GI. So to be honest with you, something that I've not really paid very much attention to, but that would be why. Who must have thought? There are only about 4 vineyards in Central Hawke's Bay. I can't see why they rushed to do that, unless they thought if people talked about Central, then there might have been a confusion between there and Central Otago. So maybe they felt that they ought to do that. But that's the geographical indicators. So again, once you put on something like North Island, you can't put anything else on the label, or New Zealand, you can't put anything else on the label. So that's why it was done. So awesome question. So I hope that's answered geographical indicators. So let's carry on with today, and we're going to look at the Wairarapa. So that is at the bottom. So I think that's a beautiful photo. There's a really lovely couple who make wine in the region, and they've named their winery Big Sky, and I just love that because well, it's a Big Sky really, but that's the escarpment vineyard, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the Wairarapa is, you can see on the map there, it's the bottom of the North Island. So when you see the map on the right hand side, then the Lake Wairarapa is where the rivers enter into. And then the important thing to remember is that it's kind of sandwiched between two hill ranges. So the Tararuas, which you see in the top left-hand corner, they're the range that you have to go up and over to get to Wellington. So I'm not sure if you, those of you who've been here, but if you're in even remotely car sick, as I am, it is a hellish journey. It's not that far as a crow flies, but by the time you've wended your way over them and back down the other side, it's a sort of almost like a barrier. So once you leave Wellington, some people drive it every day over the Rimataka Hill, but it would be maybe in the winter time, once a month, there's a sort of jolly chap on the news will tell you that the road is closed because a motorcyclist has been blown off the side into the ravine, or a lorry has lost its load into the ravine. So this is the kind of unique spirit that keeps New Zealanders the people that they are. But it is a shocking journey, to be honest with you. So you've got to go sort of up and over that before you get into to the region, and it's almost a limiting factor, if you like, because if you think of the just the economies of running a wine business, you've got to get the wine out to market somehow. So if you've then got to sort of schlep it up and over the Tararuas down to the port of Wellington, or you've then got to go all the way up and take it out of Hawke's Bay. So almost by necessity, that has meant that the region has retained a sort of small, quality-focused edge, if you like. There's not, I can't think, I mean, obviously people like Craggy are big scale now, but they have the money and the impetus to take wines up to Hawke's Bay to be bottled and what have you. But you really don't get any of the big players there. So if you go into it, you see it there. So it's the classic New Zealand vineyardscape, which is there are hills all the way around. There are rivers draining down from those hills as they come tumbling down. Then as they hit the, they flatten out, they slow down, and they drop their sediment. So this would have been a much bigger river system, and then you're left with Lake Wairarapa that then empties out into the Cook Strait. So if we were to go back, it's quite an important feature of the region. So I'm just going to back one second, which is obviously at one point in time, the two land masses were joined together, and as the plates are moving, then that central section is moving. One, the top of New Zealand, the bottom of New Zealand is subducting, but the middle is moving past one another. And that little tiny gap you see between the North and South Island is the legendary Cook Strait. So I haven't put it on, but you should, if you can look on YouTube, there are things like, legendary Cook Strait crossings, or, some sort of person having a laugh. But I don't think it's a laugh at all. I think I feel unbelievably nauseous, such that when they had a last storm, they had to set up temporary marquees so that when people got off the ferry, they had a sort of 15-minute window in which to pull themselves together before they met their relatives, because it was a very pretty sight. So what you get is the massive ocean squeezed through that little gap, and so that as the wind is funneled, it'll move faster and faster. So we're talking phenomenal winds going through the Cook Strait. We're talking Wellington. I think it's the windiest city on earth. It's not the capital. I think Chicago. Well, Chicago's not a capital, But anyway, it's one or two of the windiest places in the world. So that has a very important, if you like, aspect of the wines of the region, which we'll discuss in a minute. But when you look at that picture, you should see that just on the South Island, there's the fingers coming up, but there's this little tiny bit that sticks out, if you like, and the Kaikoura's will funnel. That's what pushes the wind up and then up through the Wairarapa. So you've got winds whistling through the Cook Strait, and the South Island sort of landmass is pushing the some of the winds so that they can come onto the land, and then they whistle up through the Wairarapa with the sort of funneled, if you like, yet further with the mountain range on the top and the mountain range on the bottom. Sorry, that's whatever. So when you look at it there, Masterton is probably the oldest. It's the biggest town within the region, and it was where somebody, I think, planted a Pinot vineyard back at the very end of the 1800s, and they've just found some wines in the cellar, and somebody's going to write a novel about it, I think, a sort of fictional novel. Be romance, it will be my feeling, if you're going to get some sales going. But because of where it is, you've got the rain, it kind of sits in the shadow of the ranges. So frost is possibly a slight problem in Masterton. During the daytime, it'll warm up, but you'll get that kind of shadowing effect. So frosts in New Zealand are a big issue. So you would see frost fans if you were putting in a new vineyard, and you had the money and you had the access to electricity, and you justify the cost. And a frost fan is something that, or frost fans are something that you're going to put in there. But it would be, it would happen. That sort of clear air, brilliant nights, and then suddenly, it's quite warm during the day, and then suddenly the temperature drops at night, we get the frost. So although it was historically where the region started, as you move further south, you've got the two GIs, which are Gladstone, which sits over on the sort of hillside on the right-hand side, and then possibly the more famous of the region, the towns within the region, which would be Martinborough at the very bottom. And why does it work that way around? Because so Wellington is our capital. It's not our biggest city. That's Auckland, where I live. But they had some research scientists who were working in Wellington, but people come over the hill for the weekend, or they have families who live up here or whatever. And a group of the scientists did some work and discovered that they thought that Martinborough was quite similar in soil type, in temperature, everything else to Dijon. So that was the sort of genesis of the resurgence of the region, if you like. Masterton had been the most longest established of the regions, sub-regions, but Martinborough, once people thought, oh, that's kind of interesting, and they were interested in planting Pinot Noir. So a group in the late 70s thought, well, we may as well, we'll explore the region. They were kind of encouraged by the fact that there were those kind of free draining river terraces. And if you look at the map there, it's maybe a bit difficult to see on the screen, but if you look at the little town, it's set on a grid, and I'll show you why that's interesting, should I say, in a minute. So I told you nobody likes people's photos, do you? But if you imagine I am standing when I take this photo, if you see where Martinborough, the word Martinborough with a star is, I'm probably just a bit south of there, but standing on a hill. So where the star is, if you went down maybe a quarter of a centimetre on the screen, that's exactly where I am when I take this photo, which is from up in just outside of Tamuna, which is a newer sub-region south of Martinborough Township. And there I'm looking straight down. You can see Lake Wairarapa in the distance, and I'm looking straight out. The Rimatekas, the Tauruas are on the right-hand side, and then you're seeing some of the hills on the left-hand side. And on a clear day, you would be able to see the South Island. If we're talking about price gouging, then the flight from Wellington to Blenheim, which is just over in Marlborough, would be. Well, the fastest I've ever done it was 12 minutes. And I know that because I just put a fork in my dinner in the lounge, and then they said, "Oh, we'll load the plane." And I thought, I've got 25 minutes to go. And then they said, "Oh, well, the plane, there's only 3 of you on the plane and the pilot wants to go home." So I thought, oh, okay, then. So hopped on that. But it must be per kilometre flown the most expensive flight in the entire world. I've paid $400 for a 12-minute flight before now. So I feel from now, if I had some sort of catapult, I could probably have shot myself from here straight down and over the Cook Strait. But so they're that close. If you think about it, Wellington and Blenheim are not this way around, are they? They're sort of this way around. Anyway, so you can see the hills all the way around and the flat vineyards you can see of Martinborough in the distance there. And then you can see how dry it is. So that was taken in February 24. So that will be an absolute classic. The wind obviously dries out. Well, the sun obviously does, but it's when they pick up those winds, that's the drying effect of the climate. Then going the other way, and then that's me standing sort of rather strategically placed fir tree right in the middle of the picture. I don't know if you've seen that. So that's, if you imagine it, these are taken in 2 different places, but I've kind of turned myself so that the Rematacus are behind me, and now I'm looking at a set of hills over which, if I went onto the other side, then I would see the sea. And that's the bottom terrace of Craggy Range. So we'll talk about why the 2 regions kind of emerged. Martinborough has been there for ages than the newer one, which is Craggy, but you can see the sort of shelter belt of trees around there, and then the super dry region behind, and then obviously there's some irrigation and some sort of lower lying terraces down. That's Sauvignon at the bottom, and then they've got Pinot planted up on the scarp slopes. So that's the statistics that the people that research scientists came up with, which they felt was kind of similar-ish. So of course there are so many more things that just sort of a bald summation of heat and temperature and rainfall, but they were encouraged enough by this to feel that they could go and plant Pinot and have some success with it. And it proved to be the case. So what did they plant? I can't remember which way I've done this. So, oh, sorry, we'll do it, how much they've got. So you've got, it's not very big, 1,000 hectares, 5,000 tonnes, and about 1% of the production. But you can see there, the Sauvignon, reassuringly, there's the 23 other varieties at the bottom. It would be disappointing, wouldn't it, if we hadn't got all those there. But there is still some Sauvignon. It's almost on the same latitude as Marlborough. So if you know what you're doing, then you can make some really brilliant Sauvignon there. If you get a chance to try the Eterangi, they do one that's, I can't think of the name of it now, but it's their Sauvignon, but they've kind of experimented. So some of it is a little bit of it is skin contact Sauvignon, a little bit of it is what you call regular, a little bit of it's been an oak, and to come together. It's not maybe as wild or as out there, if you like, as some of the more pungent examples from Marlborough that have had those kind of reductive or oak treatments on them. But it's a really beautiful wine, and then some stunning Chardonnay, and then obviously people like Pinot Gris. And then, as I said, the 23 varieties. So that shows you it's kind of dominated by Pinot Noir. So when you look there, you can see just how Pinot went from that sort of early base and up there. Sauvignon, the same thing. Chardonnay up and then down. Pinot Gris from nowhere. But the limiting factor in the Wairarapa is that wind. So we know that when it's windy, a grape tries to protect the seeds within it because it's expecting those to go on and produce new plants in the wild. And so if it's windy, a skin tends to thicken, and if it thickens, then obviously you get a little bit more tannin in those wines. So personally, I would say that the Wairarapa, it's not showy, and it's not, it's normally of our Pinots, it's probably the most structured, and you definitely get that tannic backbone running through the wines as a sort of function of where it's been grown. But with time in bottle, I think that some of the most profound examples have aged Pinot Noir would come from the region. So when I said to you, look at the map, and you saw Martinborough down the bottom, but I just took a picture of this because it was actually set up by a man called John Martin. He founded Martinborough, and he wanted to, if you look in the very centre of the town centre, at the very centre of the map, it's kind of meant to be a representation of the Union Jack, with the sort of crossing of the streets and whatever. I realise it's not exactly, but it's kind of near enough. But if you look at the, I don't know if you can see it, but there's Dublin, Oxford, New York, and he named all the streets after where he either had been or hoped to go. So the town centres are sort of a kind of, I won't say homage, but it's a kind of very much influenced by the person who started it. So if you look at that map, the one on the left-hand side there says Lake Ferry Road. That takes you literally out to the coast, or a sort of very wild south coast there. But there you can see that's why it's named after him. So the story, I put these ones on because, well, because I took a photo that wasn't actually totally woeful, but the winemakers of Martinborough believe that the success of their wines, or a lot of it, is down to that clone that you see on the left-hand side. So you know that when you come to plant Pinot, well, you come to plant any grape variety, to be fair, that you can have clonal materials. So a person who's got a vineyard in Burgundy is probably planted for, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 years. And if they need to plant a new, if they have a vine that has been diseased or damaged or what have you, then they can take a cutting from one of their own vines and propagate it and then replace the vine. So over a period of time, every vineyard should become its own kind of character, because that sort of massal selection, that kind of mass selection where every vine is slightly different. And we know that Pinot will mutate really quite easily. So when you talk about vineyard character in a long established vineyard, that's because each vine over a period of time has kind of just very slightly changed, or not by a great deal, but by enough. So the modern way to plant a vineyard is to choose clones. So that is where somebody has gone into a vineyard, has seen a vine and thought, oh, I like the look of that one. And then they literally replicate that vine over and over again so that all vines are identical. So if you would say to me today, I'm going to go and plant a vineyard of Pinot Noir, then you would probably go to River Sun, which is the nursery here in Gisborne, and say, I've got, I want to make a fruity Pinot Noir. I don't need one that has very much tannin in it, but I need it to crop sort of reliably. I'm on this kind of soil type with this amount of heat. What could you recommend? And from their book, they will have a number of different clones. So, that some are maybe more tannic than others, or some have greater perfume, some are earlier ripening. So that's a clone for you. So there are two great examples there. So Ontave, which is in Dijon, is a research station, and they are always kind of coming up with new clones. And so the bigger the number, normally the more recent the clone. And so that's a Dijon. The one on the right is the Dijon clone, which is 115, or there you can see, if you go into vineyards, you might see 777, 667, and so on and so forth. So why is this important? Because the one on the left-hand side is the one that the winemakers of the Wairarapa are devoted to. So whether or not it's an apocryphal story, I don't know. I think it's a nice story. Is that somebody was on holiday. This is where I realise it does take a slight leap in faith. But apparently somebody was on holiday in Burgundy. They went to Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, obviously. Wouldn't go to it. They sort of hopped the wall and snipped off a shoot or a small part of a vine, hopped back over, and brought it back to New Zealand in England we call them Wellington boots, the rubber boots, that you put on your farmer, but in New Zealand they call them gum boots. And apparently, I can't work out whether he packed the gum boot with the vine inside of it. One has to hope that you don't travel from Burgundy to New Zealand in a pair of rubber boots. That would be slightly grim travelling, wouldn't it? But anyway, the person brought it back to New Zealand and was stopped at quarantine by somebody who looked in the suitcase and said, oh, I don't think you should be bringing plant material into New Zealand. We have very strict quarantine and biosecurity laws. But the person who confiscated the cutting, if you like, was a customs officer called Malcolm Abel. And he thought, when he listened to the story, aha, he was quite interested in growing grapes. So he propagated it himself. He put it through testing and put it into the nursery, and they went through it. And so when it emerged on the other side, he had got his own, or it was named after him. Some people still call it the gumboot clone, but Malcolm Abel gave that clone you can see on the left-hand side his name. Well, he maybe not gave himself, but someone gave it to him. So if you said to me, oh, I'm in New Zealand and I'm growing in a fertile, sunny, no shortage really of rainfall region, I would look on the left-hand side and I would say to myself, well, the bunch of grapes looks lovely, doesn't it? But boy, are those grapes tightly packed together. If you look at it, that's a really dense bunch of grapes. So if anything happened, if you've got any kind of disease pressure or any sort of mildew or what have you, if it gets into that bunch, you are really kind of going to be struggling, aren't you? So Abel was very popular early on. It gives wines with real power. For me, it always has a sort of, let's say blood. I used to write liver in my tasting notes. And then I realised that maybe that's not a great descriptor. People don't like liver very much. You would know why. Excuse me, but the Abel has a lot of tannin on it. It gives you a very distinct character. It gives you very long-lived wines, but it does need to be ripe. And so modern clones are often adapted or grown excuse me, to as a response or a demand to vineyard conditions. If you look on the right-hand side, then the shoulders of that bunch stick out a little bit more. You can see at the very top as it comes off the main stem, you've got like two bright green arms coming out and little grapes on those. What does that do? Looser bunch architecture, you can get, you'd hope, some airflow through the bunch. And if you're having a season where you might need to restrict yield a little bit, let's say, then you could cut off the little stick on the left-hand side, the green bit, and then on the right-hand side, and the shoulders, as you call it, of the bunch, you can lose. So then you'd be able to ripen any grapes that were inside of it. You can't cut off shoulders off Abel because there aren't any, but the shape of new clones of Pinot is often in that sort of very exaggerated kind of triangle shape. That allows you to cut off those shoulders. So if you look at any premium Pinot from this part of New Zealand, usually there is a good percentage of Abel in it, but they're creating wines for for the long haul. So the Utarangi people are very keen on it. So they've just they released one Abel clone Pinot. Normally it's a blend of various parcels of fruit would go into their wine, but they did do a specific one of them. So that's kind of viticulture and how the response to the market, or a demand maybe for Pinot Noir that isn't quite so tannic or is easier to work. But if you look through the Dijon clones, for me that's a great example of two wines. Pinot really is where Martinborough sort of hangs its hat, but there is also some really awesome Chardonnay as well. That is Mendoza clone Chardonnay, And that couldn't be a better picture of the hen and chicken that you see in Mendoza Clone Chardonnay. So it's all ripening, but if you look at it, then some of the hens, the big ones, and some of the chickens, the little ones. So if you talk to someone like Michael Brajkovic at Kumi River, he cannot recommend Mendoza enough, because he likes the fact that it's hen and chicken, because he claims that it's a self-limiting, it's a yield restrictor. If they were all the big ones, then you wouldn't necessarily get the concentration. But providing he gets the little ones ripe, then he finds that slightly more skin contact, if you like, when he's pressing. There's just something about it he likes. So again, if you look at technical sheets for some of New Zealand's top Chardonnays, then often they're either 100% Mendoza or there's some Mendoza fruit in there. It does suffer from leaf roll virus, so again, that limits, the yield and what have you. But that's a really good example. I think newer clones, 548 or some of the other, I'm trying to think, clone 95 would be one of them, 548 would be another. So there's probably people who are looking for slightly bigger yields, or not with the drama that comes with that particular grape variety. But Mendoza Clone Chardonnay really is the premium one, if you like, here in New Zealand. So the Pinot, so we've said it's it's fall, and it's normally quite dry if you think about it. There's really very little. You saw those hills on the one of those sides, that incredible dryness. So it's a dry climate. Obviously, there is some rainfall as we've seen, but the Martinborough terraces, those stony soils. So as you see the river come down, then as it's kind of retreated, it's left those stony soils behind, which are obviously free draining and perfect for growing Pinot. It says they're extending to newer plantings on Tamuna Road, because there was a sort of a slight, how can I put it, about 25 years ago, there would be the original pioneers of the Martinborough region, and then people coming in, and then some people said if you weren't on the terraces, the Martinborough Terrace, then you shouldn't really be called Martinborough. And there was a sort of slightly unsettled hoo-haring, in which case that was resolved. But in the meantime, about an 8-minute, if that, drive outside of the central township of Martinborough, you'd come to this new region, which is called Tamuna. And so people could buy plenty of land there. It's, for slightly less money than it was to buy in Martinborough, and there was a potential to build these much bigger vineyards. So down in Tamuna, you would see Escarpment, which has just been bought by Torbreck. So the Australian very, very famous Barossa producer, who makes quite impactful, concentrated, let's be honest, expensive at the top end Barossa Shiraz wines that came in. I don't know if anyone knows the chap Ian Hongell who's running it, but he's very funny, and he gave a great speech about starting a winery in an earthquake zone, because Wellington is the place they think the earthquake is going to be. We've been wrong twice. It's been in Christchurch, but on top of all the other things, on top of the wind and the rain and whatever, then it is the epicenter, it would seem, of the shaky moments. So he was trying to build a vineyard, trying to build a new winery in an earthquake-prone region in the middle of COVID, and we were all laughing. But then he said, do you know, New Zealand Pinot Noir, the more you drink, the more sober you become, which we all were like, maybe not so much. But anyway, the sort of revitalisation of Escarpment will be there now. Craigie Range is down in Tamuna Road, Big Sky is down there. So it's become a sort of an important part of the region. It's not on the map, but it's definitely a place where some of the more ambitious, always sounds sort of the wrong word, but some of the newer premium focused producers have really stamped their mark on the region. So yeah, the savoury program. So we would the tannin for me is the hallmark of the Wairarapa. It's that which we don't really see a lot of in New Zealand. Pinot Noir. A lot of it is always tannin in it, but it's often that sort of silken, much more sort of powdery and fine tannins, and the saturation of fruit. Whereas in the Wairarapa, it's kind of the other way around. You get maybe some more savoury, slightly more reticent fruit characters, but with that sort of definite stamp of tannin running through them. Like all other regions, you know, there's devotees of whole bunch fermentation, so there will be people who are experimenting with that as well, or like practicing it. I think experimenting is probably the wrong. What else we put? So who are the producers to watch? Well, obviously the legacy ones have been there for some time. So the original ones would have been Dry River, Atarangi, and then Martinborough Vineyards. They were the sort of four, and then they've been joined by some of the other sort of younger ones. Of the one I put ones to watch, which are the ones that I think are quite exciting, or whatever. People, I would say, I had to do a presentation there a few years ago, and I just said you just have to kind of lose that mobility scooter, retired doctor kind of character that's here, because people do go there. You know, they sort of make loads of money in Wellington, then go over the hill and kind of settle down there. So there was very much a feeling of sort of stability, slight staidness. Everything was made in a very correct and you know, a great way, but you wouldn't have said it was maybe the most exciting. If you're a young winemaker, I can imagine that, you know, being exiled to work in Martinborough was possibly you felt you had done something wrong. But now COVID has worked favourably for the region in that a lot of the people who worked in Wellington have been allowed to work from home, so that's revitalised the town of Martinborough. There seems to be an appetite for younger people. So the chap who's the winemaker at Dry River, who's awesome, looks about, you know, 12 years old. The winemaker from Craggy, another one at 12 years old. You know, everyone suddenly looks super young, super engaged, super trying to drive the region forward. The Huntress, which is I'm very fond of. So Janine Rickard is the winemaker for Erla, but she has her own label called the Huntress because she's a Maori lady and she likes hunting. Now, whether or not you like or don't eat meat or whatever, but she maintains that if you kill something, you have to eat it all. You know, you can't just cut off the good bits and chuck the rest away. So she has these, to be fair, slightly graphic Instagram posts where she's killed something and then, you know, we have the brains one night and then the heart and then we, you know, fricassee some other internal organ and then we make prosciutto out of one of its legs and then we, do you know what I mean? So I'm waiting for the time when she kind of makes a pair of slippers or a rug out of the skin. But she said if you're going to kill something, then you have to be mindful and use the entire part of it. But she does have a tremendously hunting knife. And whenever I sit with her, I say, have you stowed that knife away somewhere? You know, I'm not going to get a leg chopped off, am I, by sitting sort of close to you? And she's like, no, but she dives as well, so she'll go into the, you know, the cold waters off the south coast of the region and go diving for something. And I think she's a great role model for all winemakers, young winemakers, that you can both work for somebody else and have your own label as well. So on Giant Shoulders, the winemaker from Dry River has gone over them. Start Co is a young couple who've set up. So almost, I'd say, in the last 5 years, it's gone from being a sort of legacy region with that sort of mantle of respectability and age-worthy wines and what have you, suddenly a kind of injection, if you like, of sort of younger people. They have Toast Martinborough, so the tickets sell out like that in November, which is super flat, you can see. So they have a sort of a kind of a walking bus where people go to various wineries and drink wine, and then there's always a sort of groups playing, and it's a sort of huge day out. So that's one of our little wine festivals, if you like, which is there. But I feel that it's if I was choosing Pinot to go into the cellar, I would consider the region a lot, a great deal, to be honest with you. I think that they have very great seasonal variation. So if it's windy, it was always windy, to be fair, but if it's a windy season, a cool season, then that may affect flowering for them. Again, that drops their yield. But if the stars align as they did this year, then I think they should be in anybody's cellar. I think the ones of the region. How are we doing for time? I can't work out. Oh, we're doing all right. We might whip on less. I can't see you all because I've turned you all off and now I've lost you entirely. David keeps telling me I can just find you somewhere, but I can't, David. Everyone's disappeared. I don't know where you all are. I'll just blunder on into the ethers and hope that...
Does anyone have any questions for Jane?
No hard ones like last week. That's great news. Maybe at the end they'll be come thick and fast.
Okay.
Okay, I'll go. David, before we break as well, we ought to go around and see if anyone is actually drinking anything delicious.
Absolutely.
That's all right with you. We'll do that in a minute. We'll do Nelson, then we'll come back and have a look at what goes on. I feel like a glass of wine myself. Now I had 14 cups of tea because having had 30 sparkling wines today in Diploma, I was feeling slightly testy when I got home, so I had a cup of tea, but now I feel like a glass of wine. So Nelson, I tried to off to China on Saturday, and when I was giving one of the NZ wine courses there, I used the phrase it's always the bridesmaid, it's never the bride, but clearly that is not a Chinese expression. And halfway through trying to explain it, I thought to myself, why did you not just leave this alone, Jane? But that's how I feel about Nelson. Great wines, but it's never front of mind. It's never maybe the one that everybody would pump for, because it is, if you like, the bridesmaid to Marlborough's bride. It's a long-established region, makes some great wines, but if you had to sort of brand recognition, maybe, well, it does fall a little bit behind, but size like that looks, somebody obviously is a bit of a Hobbit fan, Middle-earth wine, so I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm not a great fan of those movies, so I thought if ever you felt like the long journey, when I fly home from London to New Zealand, if I ever thought of a way that a tedious 27-hour flight could seem even longer, that would be sitting through a thinking Hobbity movie, but they're on all the time, so obviously I'm a minority of one there. So Nelson, almost the same as Martinborough, so 1,000 hectares vineyard, but you can see slightly 2% of production, and that is probably driven, I'll show you in a minute, by where I mean. I bet you a lot of that production would come off those Waimea plains, which you see in the bottom right-hand corner. So where it says the Richmond in the far right, then the Richmond Ranges go up and over, and then Marlborough is on the right-hand side. So it's kind of sandwiched, if you like, between the Mount Arthur Range to the top left and the Richmond Range to the bottom. So it's sort of squished in the middle there. It's a much bigger town, Nelson, than Blenheim. I always thought, coming from England, when I started the wine trade, and all wine seemed to come from or Marlborough or whatever. So I thought when I arrived there, it would be a sort of mini London. I thought it would be ginormous, and clearly it's not. Has a much bigger population, bigger airport, bigger infrastructure, bigger everything. It's a bigger population there, and a lot of that is to do with forestry. So there's a big port there that ships logs out around the world, the fishing industry, and what have you. So it's a big hub. It competes with Marlborough for the, or Blenheim, should I say, for the sunniest place in New Zealand. But normally it is actually Nelson. Hence why it is a magnet for people who are wishing to, what do we call them, later livings. I think I'm probably almost there myself, but those people who want to move somewhere lovely and sunny. So Nelson attracts them as well. Those people who seem to find some delight in outdoor activities. I'm clearly not one of them, but if you looked where it says Motueka on the top of the slide, if you keep going up there, you would end up in maybe an hour or two drive up, you'd get up into the Abel Tasman National Park. So that's one of the super beautiful national parks, remote. People walk, they walk through the Mount Arthur Ranges as well. So It sort of attracts people who are the outdoorsy types as well. So when you look at it, originally people came to Nelson from some of the early migrants would have been from Germany. They decided to plant or make beer and plant hops. So if you look at if you're into craft beer or you brew your own beer or what have you, you'll often see Muteri hops as one of the kind of famous ones. When we had our trip to Oregon, we visited a lot of craft breweries, and they all seem to have a beer that has it. It's the really distinctive one that smells like Sauvignon Blanc. You have those craft beers, you know, the IPAs are real piercing kind of almost cat whittle, blackcurrant bush Sauvignon characters, and they were up in the hills. So it's got a beer, and apples are grown there. There's lots of fruit grown in Nelson. But from our wine point of view, there's probably three sub-regions. The Kinner Peninsula, so Kinner are like sea urchins, if you like. So they're a delicacy here. They have a sort of a yellow fleshed, they're quite a distinct, I actually quite like them, but they're a very distinctive character. But obviously that's super warm, and the peninsula out there has some wineries on there, but I think we could probably say that they're in the, you know, they're taking advantage of that beautiful north-facing aspect into the sunshine. So they would maybe, you know, lovely wines, but maybe they attract people who go out for lunch or, you know, to restaurants, something like that, or Celador, and they have a few glasses of wine and revel in how delicious the scenery is. When you come back in Nelson, then you've got really the two distinct regions. So to the right, you've got the Waimea Plains, and that's why on those figures, the volume coming out of Nelson is say bigger, because they are fertile plains. It's again, you know, water comes down from the hills, carries all the stuff down, and then it slows down and just drops. So you get these big fertile plains. So some of the producers there make, you know, I mean, there's a company called Seyfried Estate, and it kind of seems miraculous that they make great wine, and it's not very expensive. They will often win the trophy for the Sauvignon or for Gewürztraminer or what have you. But you saw a family, Austrian family, or the children obviously aren't some children of Austrians, but they're Kiwi through and through. But Herman, who was the Seyfried, who was the owner, was one of the first people to move in there. We used to sell his wine in London, and he's legendary for doing everything himself. So rather than get somebody in to mend something, he tries to do it himself. And they made this spectacular Rhine, well, you used to call it Rhine Riesling in those days, little half bottles, and we'd just get all the listings in the restaurant, and then he'd say that the glass supplier was trying to rip him off, and so he went for a different bottle. So almost every vintage came in a different presentation, which is sort of idiosyncratic, but it's actually quite hard to list something if every time you go in you have to explain that actually the bottle shape has changed 100% with every new vintage. But he's sort of endearingly odd, if that makes sense. So he's on the Waimea Plains, or the family's on the Waimea Plains, and there are other ones as well. So you know, if you want to make something that has if you want to drop your cost of production to make a bottle of wine, then you can mechanize as much as you want. So flat vineyards that are quite fertile, high cropping, chance of mechanization, all the, you know, add-ons would give you the Waimea Plains. So maybe slightly fruit focused and rich and sort of appealing in youth, if you like. The Muteri Hills up on the left-hand side, that's where some of the more premium wines, or should I say wines built for aging, would be, and led by, well, I want to call it Neudorf, but they call it Neudorf. So that's one of the pioneering wineries of the region. So Tim and Judy Finn started it up, and they've probably done more than anyone else to put Nelson on the map. So they have the quality focus, using those sort of clay soils up there to give these sort of profound Pinots and Chardonnays and what have you. They've decided to retire, and their daughter has taken over, Jude has taken over the winery, and they've got a really awesome winemaker called Todd, who is one of those, you sometimes just talk to people and you think, actually, they're an awesome person. And the wines that they've made are probably a little bit more buttoned down now, a little bit more strained. They're trying some Chardonnay, which is, in concrete or amphora. Anyway, it's not an oak version of Chardonnay. So I think you could. They just need to be a bit more critical mass, maybe in Nelson. So one or two great ones. Brightwater Vineyards would be another one. There's some really delightful ones, but they just need a couple more because they're always going to be competing alongside Marlborough. Oh, look, there's a bigger picture. You have to squint at the tiny one's there, but you can see there's the town's on the right-hand side, and then down to Richmond, and then the road takes you down and through, and you go to the west coast that way. And then, and as I say, the Mootray, the Motueka River, the Waimea River, they're all draining down and then into Tasman. So the region is called Tasman down there. So Sauvignon Blanc, plenty of it. Obviously, that makes some, who wouldn't make it? And then Pinot Gris, and reassuringly, as I said, the other 20 varieties that are not very much of anything, is it? 3 hectares of something, whatever. Shows you Sauvignon there, and then Nelson Pinot would be, as I say, it's got their 2 sub-regions. So you've got the Waimea Plains on those alluvial gravels and the Mootrays on those clay soils. And that reflects into the style of wine that is grown there. So you get as I think the Waimea Plains will be more approachable, maybe not so profoundly concentrated, ready much sooner. There's nothing wrong with that. We can't all have cellars full of wine that we can't drink. That would be hopeless, wouldn't it? But for the profound, all the ones with the tannins and the density and the structure and what have you, then the kind of Mootray Hills give you the place-based soils from which you can then grow and get these densely compact styles of wine. I'd look for Nelson if I was you. It's always, it's always delicious. So, there's the beer industry is quite strong there. It's a craft beer driven by the hops. Or if you like sunshine, another reason to go there, I would suggest. Let me look at my phone, and it is 25. So I can't, I'm blind here as usual, David. So you might have to go around and ask people if they're drinking anything delicious, then we can all squeak with excitement.
Okay. Now, Debbie, are you drinking anything?
Yes, I am. I'm drinking the Dog Point Vineyard Pinot Noir.
Oh. And which vintage is it?
2020.
Oh, lovely. You enjoying it?
Yes, very much. I mean, it is, time is it here, 5:30 in the morning, so.
Wow. Oh, well, they should get extra points in the exam for devotion to the cause. Good on you. Wow.
Al is on the same road as me.
That's awesome. And
so
then
it's a lovely Pinot. I don't like.
So you can't have wine made by toads. You have to have wine made by lovely people. And Murray, who makes that, is one of the loveliest. So good news. Sorry, I interrupted you. Anyone else? I'm sorry, I spoke over you.
Yeah, this is Al. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, love.
I am drinking a Supernatural wine from Hawke's Bay.
Wow.
And it's a Sauvignon Blanc. And first of all, I had to find a crown cap opener to open the bottle. It's the first wine I've ever seen with a crown cap sold at the store that way. When I first tasted this Sauvignon Blanc, by the way, it's a 2020. It's pale but gold in color, and the first taste was, this is a Riesling. Actually got a little petrol to it. But as it's opened up and aired out a little bit, I'm getting more tropical fruit, particularly strong pineapple. I would have expected a light body, but it's more of a medium-bodied wine. High acidity. but it's a unique wine. I've never had a wine like this before, especially called a Sauvignon Blanc.
And what made you choose it?
Well, here in America, like I've mentioned earlier, it's hard to find New Zealand wine, so when you see one, you grab it.
Okay. So they would be one of the people, and it's got kind of that. Is that the one with that sort of Dada-esque label on it? It's kind of quite a arresting presentation. It's a clear glass bottle, is that right?
It's green.
Oh, it's green. They've taken it out of clear glass. Oh, that's interesting.
Yep.
So that will be one of the. I bet it's in a low sulfur as well. I think that's what they're aiming for. Most of skin contacty kind of. So I haven't had that wine for a year or so now. But good on you for choosing something unusual. Anyone else?
I have something interesting from a wine education perspective. So I ran into Dan's on the way home. I happened to work for Dan's. And Isabella Estate have released, which is also owned by Dan's. Our American friends probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but they're doing a 2-pack of 375ml bottles of Isabella Estate Sauv Blanc, and the difference between the two is wild yeast and inoculated yeast.
Oh,
Yeah, so I'd never seen that before, hadn't heard about it. So I grabbed that and stuck it in the freezer. Made sure just to check myself that I blind tasted myself, as it were. It's interesting. Like the inoculated taste, lighter, more passion fruit, more what you would expect, and the wild yeast is, heavier, weightier, a bit textural, a bit less fruitful. So, yeah, a good little and the way it's packaged and whatnot. Yeah, I think it's interesting for a layman, but nice little angle to see them side by side. So I think it was $30 for the 2-pack. So go out and grab it. Not selling it for the company, was just curious and pleased with the purchase.
And are they both from the same vintage?
Yep, same parcels, just different yeast.
Oh wow! Because the winemaker, if it's still Jeremy Mackenzie, he used to work for Villa, and he's a super fascinating thing, isn't it, to see them side by side, because like both of them, but for slightly different, as you say, slightly different.
Yeah, and it's the sort of thing that we all sort of see, but to put it out there for the consumer, I think it's a great idea.
Well, you've given me. I've got to do this thing for New Zealand Wine on for the WSET on new things happening in New Zealand, and you might just find me like one of my new things. So I'm thrilled we had this conversation. Search that when I put a star by it, so I'll go and ask them what they're doing.
I will I'll put the link up.
Yeah, no, perfect. Anyone else?
I'm drinking Dog Point as well. Oh, sorry if I cut off someone. I wanted to taste Sauvignon tonight while we were in Nelson, Marlborough, Martinborough. But yeah, Dog Point, just their lovely sort of entry level, definitely sort of export volume wine for those guys, and just a wine that really speaks of typicity. So yeah, it's a fantastic sort of jumping out of the glass New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc.
And which vintage is it?
It's 23. Most outlets in Australia now are stocking 23, which obviously speaks to the popularity of the wine here too. So that's great.
Yep, no, it's a yeah. Oh, I like it very much. It's quite a distinctive flavour profile.
Correct.
Kind of an out there one, but beautifully made. So, and again, as I said, made by a lovely person. So that gives it extra points in my book. I like those ones. Also, we can talk about the wine when we get to Marlborough after we've had the comfort stop, as it were, in a few minutes. Wow, I feel very tasty now because everybody else has something, and I've only got a cold cup of tea, so I might have to go upstairs and have a ferret around and see if I can come up with something delicious. But is that okay, David? If everyone just gets a break from me for a little bit?
yeah, of course. When we come, there's a few more people who've got some wine, but when we come back, we can go through some wines. I think
Wines,
Georgie, Simon.
I found you. You're there. There's like 14 of you now across the bottom of my screen. This is great.
Oh, there you go.
There we
Did
are.
you want to have a break and then come back and we discuss the other wines that the other people have?
Okay, let's do that.
Is everyone happy with that? Perfect. So we'll see everyone in, say, 5 minutes.
No, no.
Natalie, was that your water glass?
Which one?
Was it green?
The green one's water.
I thought you were drinking chartreuse for a second.
That would be amazing.
Oh
No,
my
but
gosh, what happened?
This Pinot, when I first had a bit of a smell, it
Yeah.
smelled a bit like a Negroni. I was smelling like
You thought of me.
blood orange peel, and I was thinking of you going, ooh.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. I found something really interesting tonight, which I'm gonna open on Sunday when we meet. I found a Martinborough Pinot. Oh, sorry, a Hawke's Bay Pinot. That it's like
Need to move it
2016.
this way a bit. Can't see the label, Dal. Oh
You
yeah,
see it?
yeah.
Ooh. These guys, like, it's actually quite ripe, which is super interesting. Speaking of the climate from Hawke's Bay last week, but it was like 276 cases made, and I'm assuming that is dozens, but like, it was marketed like, I should have taken a photo of the tag, and I might go back tomorrow, but it was like, you know, showing age but still fit. But they spoke of the small volume about this producer. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And I don't think I've had a Pinot from Hawke's Bay. So I'm like, that's exciting.
Delicious.
Yeah.
It's very exciting. I don't think I've had a Pinot from Hawke's Bay either.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I tried to try as much wine when I lived there, but like, you know, regionally, but I don't think Pinot from Hawke's Bay was one I ticked off. So that, yeah, I'm excited. And it's, 14%. She's
Wowza.
big. She's big. So it'd be very interesting to see it.
When are you getting up on Sunday, Leash?
No, I'm here. I'm in Sydney.
Oh, there you
I've
go.
been here since last Sunday. Oh, yeah. I've been here from Sunday. I'll drive home after class on Monday.
Nice. How come you're up? Can't get enough
I
of
had
it.
the D5 exam yesterday.
Oh, how'd you go?
Yeah, really well.
Yay!
I wanted to nail it, given that it's a subject so dear to my heart, and I did a lot of study for it. So, and thanks to Natalie, I gained a few really useful last-minute tasting bottles. So I went to Nat's place on Monday. So
Awesome.
yeah. So yeah, no, it's yeah, the weather's been amazing. What rain? What rain, you Sydney siders? Like, this is glorious.
This isn't it.
I hope the rain went down south to Victoria. Sounds like you guys really needed it.
No, we haven't had any. It's been one of our driest autumns. I mean, and yes, Rutherglen has relatively rain-free. No, despite the textbook, it's been the coldest May that we've had on record. So we've had more frost nights, and obviously, like, with that drop in temperature and no rainfall as well, like, it has meant that, yes, this year from a grape growing lens, like, people have been able to ripen everything, and that means like Beechworth, King Valley, Alpine Valley, but also like the department's services like DELP and all the other agricultural government funded departments have tried burning off more so in May. So we've had a lot of conflict that way between wine growers and yeah, department bodies. But all in all, it was a pretty great vintage for Victoria, I would say. So
It's all coming up spinner for you this week.
yeah, I know. Sydney's delightful. It's nice to be away from home.
Yeah.
Feels
Okay.
Smiling.
Right.
Sorry.
David, David, you're on an echo.
Am I still on echo?
I can't. You just sound perfect to me.
Sorry, that might have been me. My headphones died, so now I'm just free speakering.
So, but Georgia, I believe you have a wine that you might want to tell us about.
I do, but embarrassingly, I'm in the wrong region because I've only got one white from the regions that we're covering tonight, and I didn't feel like a Chardonnay. But I'm in North Canterbury, 2015 Koyama The Rise Pinot Noir from Takahiro Koyama. It's phenomenal. It's way more youthful than I expected. There's so much fruit to it, and it honestly smells like a freshly cracked cardamom pod, and it's great.
Wow.
It's really, really yummy, really special wine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Whoa. I'm going to have to up my game for next week. I'm going to shuffle around in the. I'm thinking where I'll be next. Oh, I know, I'll be in Shanghai, but I will take something with me and try and you know, what am I going to try and do? Be thrilled, but I have to put something in my suitcase, I think, so that I'll be there with something fun. Anyone else? No, we're all smiling. It was quite scary with you all looking at me, so I might actually make you all smaller again because there's like 40,000 little faces all looking at me. So I felt left out last week, and now I'm slightly intimidated by you all smiling. So I'm going to just mute you and not find you anymore. That's all right, and then I can I'll go from there. Oh, there we are.
Fantastic.
Now I can see you, David. I'm feeling much better now because I now know how to do it. It's only taken me 5 years to work out how this works, but I, you know, you can always learn something, can't you? So
Very true.
I know. No, there's no. Yeah, no. Right. So let us box on. So ta-da! We end up finally in Marlborough. So I put this one because I rather like this. To the Blenheim Vineyard, said Justice Beattie, who went on to become New Zealand's Governor General. He said, the Blenheim Vineyards, get hold of Montana's PR man and make the name stick. Cloudy Bay Vineyards is a terrible name. Blenheim Vineyards it is. So I think I mentioned it when we did Hawke's Bay, which is that Montana was the biggest wine company here, and then it got bought by Allied Domecq, and then it got bought by Pernod Ricard, and now it's all in a bit of a state, to be honest with you, because I don't know what's happening in Australia, but obviously their word on the street is that, you know, somebody's buying something and somebody's trying to buy something else, and it all becomes a bit of a sixes and sevens. But at one time, you know, Montana, they were the preeminent wine company here, and they had things like Church Road and Camshorn and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, but one of the viticulturists thought, where are we going to buy new vineyards? We're coming up against opposition in Hawke's Bay. It's expensive, and so they sort of flew down to Marlborough, scouted around, bought, I think it was about 1,000 hectares of land in about a week. They did it pretty quickly. And the sales agent for the vineyard at the time was John Maris, who is Brent Maris's father of Wither Hills, and then lately of Morisco and the Ned, or what have you. But apparently the name that he decided to have was Cloudy Bay Vineyards because of Cloudy Bay. And hence this is why it's so funny, because they thought it was a, you know, terrible name, so they came up with something else, and that left the way for David Homan to set up Cloudy Bay Vineyards. But it is one of those stories. So for us in New Zealand, it is, you know, 81% of the production. You know, 30,000 hectares growing kind of yearly, it would appear. And of those vineyards, it's really dominated by Sauvignon. So there's a big argument here at the moment whether or not, you know, do you celebrate the fact that one region is doing so well and driving the success and export and all the other things, or on the countryside, do you feel that it's, you know, and sorry, by the joyousness of Sauvignon, that allows everything else to ride along with it. So, you know, you can get a listing for Sauvignon in a restaurant overseas, or would you like to see the Pinot Noir as well, or what have you? Without it, where would the New Zealand wine industry be? And there's the other argument, which is that we are too dependent on one particular grape variety from one particular region. So if the mood changes, well, then where have we left ourselves? But I can't make my mind up, to be honest with you. I realise that having all your eggs in the proverbial one basket is probably not a great look. But then, you know, other regions of the world, I presume it's one country with one grape variety in one region, isn't it? But, you know, there are lots of places. I'm sure people, you know, if we went on a vineyard visit to Loire or to, you know, we wouldn't say to them, you know, what are you going to plant after Sauvignon? Or we went to, you know, I don't know, Burgundy, well, what's the next big thing after Chardonnay? But there seems a bit of sort of transitory kind of philosophy when it comes to the new world. Ooh, what's next? Or, well, we could just concentrate on what we do now, to be honest with you. But anyway, it doesn't show any sign of abating. I've been in the wine industry, looking at your faces on there, probably longer than you've all been alive. But you know, it came as a kind of fun thing in the mid 80s, and all those years later, we are still selling it, growing it, making it. It's still in demand. So I can't, for the life of me, see it being snuffed out yet by any stretch of the imagination. Nothing, I think, in our lifetime, in anyone's lifetime, is going to overtake Sauvignon. Well, clearly that's a ridiculous thing to say because something might do, but I can't see it happening anytime soon. There is still an insatiable demand, it would seem, for the wine. So we'll have a quick look at this one. Then I will remember that there is a second map after this. So you can see where it is. So you had Nelson to it's sort of northwestern corner, and then you flip up and over those Richmond Ranges, and then you find yourself in Marlborough and the eponymous Cloudy Bay in the far right. So when you go in more closely, then you've got the, so if you stood in the word where it says Blenheim, if you stood there and looked out to sea, you'd see Wellington just across the, you just see it across the Cook Strait. To get there, you've unfortunately got to go all the way where that little road is leading off at 12 o'clock north. Then that takes you to a little town called Picton, and from Picton you then got to sail all the way through the Marlborough Sounds to all the kind of inlets till you get into the open sea, and then it's only sort of a quick dash across before you enter the harbour in Wellington, but it seems to take forever. But you can see there that, so you've got the Richmond Ranges, as I say, to the north, and then you've got the Waro Valley. Now that is the traditional part of Blenheim. That is the kind of alluvial stones. That is where the word, the actual word Waro Valley is. That would be I think that's the Upper Renwick Road. So you've got three which are, I love the New Zealanders, which are called Upper, Middle, and Lower Renwick Road. So there's three of them there. But the Waro you see at the top, that would be the traditional heartland of the Golden Mile, if you like, of Sauvignon Blanc production. That's where we'll talk about the stars in a minute, but that would be the classic. So you've got Blenheim on one end, and you've got, I think they call it, I want to call it Renwick, but they call it Renwick, I think. Well, I know that they do.
Renwick.
I prefer it with the W in myself. Renwick always sounds so whatever. And then you've got Blenheim, and then you would come down and you go up and over the Wither Hills. So it's kind of sandwiched between those kind of ranges, if you like. If you were to look, as you look at it now, the Waro is going sort of left, right along there, and then the southern valleys are kind of fingers that come up, if you like. So that you've got things like the Waihopai, the Omaka, the Brancott, and these southern valleys are more clay-based. So a lot of the really great Pinot coming from the region comes off those southern valleys. You get the sort of hillside vineyards, you get a slightly richer clay soil. the chance to get more concentration, more tannin profile, more anything. So they tend to be the southern valleys. If you wind then up and over the Wither Hills, you see the State Highway 1. So when I said last week, don't try and get from A to B very quickly, because there's a sort of winding road and kind of hairpin bends, and you always meet either a caravan, car towing a caravan, or a lorry tug off behind it. You'd go up and over, and then you'd hit the Awatere Valley, which is this southern one. So that's a newer region. If you were to break them up down and put them in kind of descending order, like, you know, Russian dolls, then the Awatere is bigger than Hawke's Bay. So it's a massive region now. It's a big region. Again, driven initially, I think, by the fact that the kind of heartland of Blenheim was starting to get expensive and sort of land was at a premium. But suddenly people have worked out that actually Awatere gives you a different flavour profile. It's slightly higher and it's slightly windier and it's slightly cooler. So if you looked at the flavour profile for Sauvignon Blanc, then the Waro has those red capsicum, passion fruit, guava, sort of ripe, intense characters, whereas the Awatere has the sort of lifted, slightly, when I say green, I do not mean unripe, I mean sort of slightly lifted, sort of fresh basil, sort of slightly grassy, kind of fennel kind of characters, because it's coming from somewhere cooler. You can see there's a little town of Seddon, which is there, which again, they had a massive earthquake there not so long ago, and everything moved up and down and backwards and forwards and what have you. But that's what it looks like at the moment, and we'll have a discussion about some other emerging regions in a second. The sort of shallow lagoons that you see right by the coast just south of Cloudy Bay, they're salt, so lots of Marlborough's sort of that flaky sea salt would come from there. And as well, I can't remember what my next one is. I remember. So this is a sort of pictorial reference. So in 1999, so I moved here in 2000, that would be the vineyards of Blenheim. So you've got Blenheim to the right, you've got Renwick there, you've got some of them more established vineyards, some of them coming up into those southern valleys. So by 2000, now we're starting to explore other bits through the Waro, and then 2002, starting to plant down here in the Awatere, and then 5, 10, 14, 18. It's just an explosion of any, I don't know if there's one more after that, no there isn't. Explosions, if you could see, you know, in 20 years, how much the vineyards, every bit has been examined, sub-regional variation comes into play, the exploration of those southern valleys up to the Waihopai, for example. That's the one where, you know, the Waihopai is where Spy Valley is, because it had those two white, you know, the two, I don't know what's in them, but the two great big balls that you know, the Spy satellite kind of things. That's why it's called Spy Valley, but that's the Waihopai, which you see up there at the end. So the great thing about Marlborough Sauvignon is it doesn't really matter, it doesn't seem to matter where you go to or where you plant your vineyards, you still can retain that kind of distinctive, precise, exuberant, saturated sort of characters to them. The vineyards that you see moving up here into the Upper Waro, they would be the preserve really now of some of the large companies, because you're moving away from the moderating influence of the sea. So as you move further inland, and some of those vineyards are kind of quite sheltered by the ranges, so they're quite sort of over, you know, sort of shadowed early in the morning, then frost would be a big worry if you were so far inland and so far up that valley. But they are the ones that can afford to put in the frost fans. So people like Delegates, Yealands, probably Yealands not so much, but Indevin would be up there. Any of the big companies that rely on or are exporting large volumes of Sauvignon Blanc probably just can't get enough by planting on the existing. We're running out of space down there. And as I said earlier, lots of Sauvignon is a multi-regional blend. So you get some of the richer fruit from the Waro, you take some of the cooler stuff from the Aotere, you get some from up in some of these inland alpine vineyards. The ability to blend gives you this, the name of the producer and the word Marlborough Sauvignon is really all you need. It doesn't. There is some exploration of sub-region now, and there's some people bottling sub-regional wines or single vineyards wines or what have you, but that is not where the bulk of Marlborough Sauvignon is. It is in those consistency. I presume a bit like, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say, but like champagne, really. The name of the producer. Does anyone, when they buy a bottle of Bollinger, know exactly which vineyards it came from? No, they just trust that the person who's put the blend together knows what they're looking for. I think it's the same for Marlborough Sauvignon. Of course, one of these evenings wouldn't be the same without one of my photos. So that's as we were flying down to Christchurch, and that is in February. So there's still a little bit of snow up on the ranges, but where that's taken from is I'm flying over the upper, the Alpine Waro. So I'm going south, and then that river, Braided River, going all the way down, you can see all of those vineyards on either side, or they would not have been there maybe even 10 years ago. Because if you carry on up this, if you come sort of to the right, and so you're coming into the plain, as it were, then if you carry on going that way, you get to a place called St Arnaud, and then there's a small ski field up there, and then you'd continue in. But we were coming back there, maybe 2 or 3 years ago now, and I was texting someone, and my husband was like, "Oh, look, there's vineyards," and I thought, "Oh, there aren't, because there aren't only this far inland." But I kind of humoured him and said, "Yeah." And I looked out the window. I said to him, "Oh, you're right. They're right up here now." So people are exploring regions which maybe have been too cool even 10 years ago to consider, but with the ability, as I say, to have frost fans or maybe more knowledge of how to manage these cooler sites. It's become super important, and then you can see the ranges there, and you go up in those, and you can see going down to the Aotere, and then the road would take you down, so you're going to Christchurch. So Marlborough, you get these. It means the word in Maori means hole in the sky. So that intensity of sunshine, that lack of any sort of what's it called, kind of pollution, if you like. So you get this blindingly sunny days, you get crystal clear nights, you get fertile soils, you get rainfall, you get all those things coming together. The diurnal range is normally pretty good if you want to grow grapes that have got sparkling acidity levels, because normally that's a feature of that cold night, hot day. That big difference between daytime and nighttime temperatures will be there. And as I say, the Bragato Wine Institute, so there's a research station. So if you remember, Romeo Bragato was the chap who came here in the 1895 and wrote a report on New Zealand's viticulture, and they've named the research station in Marlborough after him. So they're doing lots of work on plotting with consumers or tasters that are sort of blind, the kind of what can you smell and taste, and whether you want the tomato stalks or you want the green ones or you want the ripe ones, the guava, passion fruit, and all that kind of thing, and then working to create these wines so that you kind of label, if you like, is maybe leaning slightly one side or the other. So it's really we tend to lump it in and go, "Oh, it's Marlborough Sauvignon," but it's a great deal more complicated, I think. I think that's so. You've got, what does it say? Braided River movement. So you could see that, couldn't you, at the bottom? You can see very clearly from that aerial shot. And then, as I said, Waro has got those stony barren soils at the top, early ripening lush, because the Golden Mile, and the Southern Valleys again with the Pinots, and then the Silty Loams, which is over in the cooler, slightly cooler. They put there, I think actually in the market. So what do we talk about when we want to make Sauvignon Blanc? And this, I've got my arms folded now because I just led the panel doing the Appellation Marlborough wine tasting. And I would, if anyone can come up with a better term, I would be fascinated to hear it, because I would say most Marlborough Sauvignon is made in that cool ferment, piercing acidity, fruit-driven, vibrant expression. That's what we're known for, and that's what I think lots of people are enjoying. And of course, we've got the one from Hawke's Bay, which is very left of centre, I would say, that example. But good on you for trying it. But that's really what, as long as you've got concentration, as long as you've got intensity and what have you, then I think that that's what we're best known for, and that sort of classic style, if you like. But then that leaves you with this other group called alternative. So we judged all of them we judged them to begin with as classics, and then as alternative styles. And then in the end, they were we were given free rein to choose. You know, we could have had 12 classics or 12 alternatives, it didn't really matter. But when we brought them back for the final call back to work out the final 12, I said we should just randomise them all, and let's not put alternative on one side and classic on the other, because I think it should just stand on its own 2 feet and be known as Marlborough Sauvignon. But how you can convince the consumer that there's a slight difference, that I think is a work in progress, quite frankly. Because, you know, I love if you said to me, we'll have a bottle of Oyster Bay Sauvignon Blanc, then it may not be the most complex wine in the world, but it's delicious and exactly what it says on the label, and you know what you're going to get and whatever. And whereas something like the Section 94 from Dog Point, which has got that kind of strong wild ferment influence and the reduction and a little bit of older oak on it, etc., is perfectly valid wine style. But I wonder whether or not people who buy one and get the other, isn't it? It's a bit like if you like Riesling with a little bit of sweetness in it, and then you end up with something from the Clare, you probably are running screaming from the hills thinking, well, it's kind of a nice wine, but it really wasn't the kind of, Cabernet style I was hoping for, and vice versa. If you like that sort of bone dry linear style, and you end up with something with sweetness in it, you might feel hard done by. So I'm not sure what the answer is for Marlborough Sauvignon, how we extend the category without lumping people into alternate. It just seems a little bit forced, if you like, or in some ways better. You know, how many times do you read those tedious wine forums, which seem to be populated with people who seem to make a living out of picking a fight with somebody else, but they always put, don't they, that they like Cloudy Bay Sauvignon, but they prefer the more serious to cocoa, or, okay, so it's more serious, or that kind of thing. And I don't think that's very fair. I think there's just a difference. It's a bit like drinking beer, isn't it? Some people, there must be somebody in the world who's drinking, Heineken or Stella Artois or Corona or something like that. And for everybody who's drinking the hairy, weird, hazy, cloudy craft beer. And some days you might feel like a weird, hazy craft beer, and some days you might just think, well, I fancy a bottle of cold lager or something. So there's room for both of them, but how do you market them? Or tell somebody, well, this is, like Al's got his Supernatural. Did he have any clue to purchasing before he bought that wine? If he'd always liked that Chris Marlborough style, would he find this one different and opened his mind, or would he feel disgruntled that he actually liked the other style and he was hoping for one of those? So,
Jane, Georgie's got a question. Do you mind taking that?
No, of course not. No, I'm thrilled.
Not so much a question, but just barrel fermented Sauvignon Blanc is one of my truly favorite things in the world. And so I'm a sommelier. From a restaurant and sales perspective, I'm in the eastern suburbs of Sydney, which is we drink Pinot Gris and ex-rosé from Provence, and I won't drink anything else. And I'll put sulfur ones in my wine. I wish I was kidding, but that's what I deal with every day. But I do still have barrel fermented Sauvignon Blanc on my tiny wine list. And the way that I kind of sell it is if people still love that really beautiful kind of refreshing acidity and those aromatics of Sauvignon Blanc, but if they want something that's a little bit richer, a little bit more food friendly, not quite in the levels of a Chardonnay, but certainly having a little bit more of that structural integrity, that's the way that I kind of look at it. So if you want that Sauvignon Blanc, but a little bit more, and I don't know if that would be a good way to market it, but that's just kind of how I sell it. And I managed to get a surprisingly large amount of people who wouldn't typically like those styles across the line.
And that's awesome, can I say? But that's great because you're A, enthusiastic, B, knowledgeable, C, you're actually human, so that you can talk to the person about it. And we all wish we had someone like you with us. But do you know what I mean? If one of your customers or restaurant goers goes to a supermarket, how would they know if you had one of your delicious the oak influenced wines? Do you see how would I know that's the style that it was, as opposed to the Sauvignon one that was, the usual one that's sitting next to it? Does it? What words could we put on the label to let them know? Because you must know yourself from even sweetness. I've been doing lots of level 1 courses, and people are just befuddled when you read the back label of a wine bottle and there's some sort of twaddle on the back of it which has nothing to do with anything useful, or they blind them by saying things like, made with traditional Burgundian techniques, as though anybody who's not winey would remotely know what that is. You can't find whether it's dry, sweet, pink, green, or, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? I don't think we do a very good job through the packaging or labeling of it. And you sound like a lovely person, and if we come to the restaurant, then obviously we'll wait for a recommendation from you. But for the ordinary person, you know what I mean, who hasn't got a lovely person like you, then it might be.
Could we bring back oaked? Because that would help.
What's that, love?
Could we bring back just the word oaked? Would that help? That would help me a lot.
Yes, I think that would do. I have to fold my arms again here, because Constellation did a survey in England, and it kind of puts us in that. I don't know why I started this story, because it makes us sound as though we're idiots. But there was a hilarious, simply mind-boggling set of responses. Somebody thought there was acorn. It said oaked on the label. What does it mean? Someone thought it had acorns in it. So I'm not sure. And for everybody who, you see, now we're going on a philosophical journey, aren't we? Because, all the oaky Chardonnays, if you put oaked on it, are you going to turn off the people who were turned off Chardonnay because they thought that's what it was like? I don't know. I mean, I've just been in Austria, and they've got like 47 different classification systems, and you're trying to work out which is Marag from your Spiel from you, this, that, and the other, and I just wandered around thinking, well, this is all incredibly complicated. I can't work out what's going on. But I'd love to know, because I think I think Marlborough Sauvignon is diverse, and I think you're absolutely right. So some of those slightly more textural wines with a little bit of maybe older oak on them, or a little bit of that gunflint reduction, or they've been on lees for an extended period. You're right, you get all the texture and the goodies, if you like, without necessarily, but you still get that sort of lightness from the acidity. But I'm going to put that on my...
Neudorf does it quite well on their, sorry, and then I'll stop tangenting.
No, go for it. I love it. Go on.
I think Neudorf does it really well on their Tiri Tiri series. On the back of the Pinot Gris, it says luscious tropical lychee.
Ooh.
And it's a very rich Pinot Gris with quite a bit of residual sugar, and it's not my personal favorite, but it's something that my guests at the restaurant really love, despite the fact that they always say, I want a dry Pinot Grigio, and then they choose that, and it's the antitheses of a dry Pinot Grigio. But I think they've really nailed the marketing, and it's easy to point on the bottle. This wine says that it's luscious, just so you know what you're getting into. So it doesn't necessarily say this wine is oaky or sweet or anything, but everyone, I mean, it's the same as voluptuous. I quite like to use as a descriptor for richer wines because everyone has their own understanding of that word. And for some, it might be really quite rich and curvy, and for others, maybe just a little bit. So I think it's sort of, it allows people to take themselves on their own journey while still being quite upfront with what they are.
You're absolutely right. I'm sorry, I'm thinking about it. I'm looking over into the darkness in my office thinking, yeah, that's the thing. We need to, we're probably quite good at drinking wine and probably quite good at buying wine, but we're absolutely terrible at selling the stuff. Do you know what I mean? So maybe you're absolutely right. If we were more honest on the back label or gave the consumer some sort of tools to know the style or the weight or what they were getting without it sounding like piffle, then we'd be a lot better off. I shall go and have a look at the back of the Neudorf wines then, so we'll have a look at those ones. So sorry, that's helped. That has been super useful. Thank you. I like when people, otherwise it's just me sitting here on my own in my office, you know, thinking about life.
Roger, you have a question?
Well, kind of a question, but also just a point. So we talked about Tony Bish last week and his golden eggs. Tony, on his golden egg products, has a beautiful golden egg design on the label. And I God honestly thought this Easter, oh my gosh, what a winner. It looks like an Easter egg. Absolutely amazing. And we just couldn't move it. Like, it's customers just can't connect with it. I tried so hard to explain it and they just could not understand it. And on this same token, the Wild Ferment, Kevin Judd, Grey Wacky. It's a beautiful product. I love it. Like, it's lovely, but it's really hard to sell to customers because they just don't understand what I'm talking about, because I'm using wine terms that they just don't understand. When you're trying to explain wild ferment to them or what natural yeast, I'm very careful not to say natural because they freak out.
Quite rightly.
Yeah.
No, I know. You see, this is it, isn't it? Because people are. I'm sorry, because I can't see you. I haven't written down your name, but the lady who's got the 2 lots of Isabel Estate. You know, I would say to the students, you know, we make much of on wine of some things, but I've yet to, you know, so it's wild ferment or spontaneous ferment or all those kind of things, naturally fermented. But I've yet to see a bottle of wine that on the back label it says the winemaker, you know, took delivery of a foil packet which we cut open and mixed up and poured in. Do you know what I mean? We always talk about some things in wine, you know, as the sort of positive, you know, the traditional techniques or this, that, and the other. But we don't mention all the other things. So the consumer, I think, gets a sort of slightly.
But that's the thing, Jane. I don't taste it. Like, I get told this has wild yeast in it, and so I know that wine at the end of the day, you know, has wild yeast. But because I'm not, none of us are actually drinking what's the one with just standard yeast from your packet. So that's why it really piqued my interest this afternoon, that I was like, well, when do I get to literally taste those side by side? If we're not tasting that, when's the consumer tasting that? And at least that gives them, anyone who's vaguely curious will then get sort of a reference point to where they go from there.
Yeah.
Rog, to that point, because I'll have to show my team at work who don't have any, I don't work in the alcohol part of the company. What I was thinking the analogy would be sourdough bread as opposed to the packet of yeast you have. So I'll see if I can string that analogy along for them and see.
I really love that. That's good. That's very good.
Yeah. Everyone at your store is going to know about making sourdough in COVID, I'd imagine.
I'm feeling very dark at this moment because I'm the person who didn't make it. So in lockdown, I tried to make it. And please don't tell me, oh, it's super easy. The knob melted on my Le Creuset pot. The oven was so hot. And I had what I can only describe in sourdough bread making terms as a biscuit. And I took the lid off it and I'm like, what the hell is that? And it must have risen about an 1/18 of an inch. And consistency. And my husband said, it looks like one of those things they find when they dig up a new thing in Pompeii. You know, it's been sort of, you know, petrified from 2,000 years. So Ronald, who I work with, who's based in the Netherlands, is coming to visit New Zealand, and he's promised me that in return, he will give me a sourdough. I think my hands are too fat and hot. They're really cold hands to make anything floury. But literally, every time I look on Instagram and somebody's like, "And look at my sourdough," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'd rather not actually if I was you, but like a frisbee drip." I don't. It was, I bought so I've got a new Lodge cast iron pot. I've got a German bread knife that cost a fortune. I've got a new chopping board to present it on, plus the, unsalted butter. I've got everything I need to be the person that I dream of being, apart from the wretched bread. So never mind. Disgruntled about that myself. But anyway, let's move to something funner before I get myself in a bad mood thinking about it.
I made focaccia during COVID because just the oil hides all your sins. It doesn't actually matter what the bread tastes like. It's just fatty and everyone enjoys it.
But just on the yeast thing, I think the biggest thing is that people like to romanticize the wine industry, and packet yeast doesn't romanticize that, nor does wild yeast. And thanks to the natural wine movement and all of the faulty crap foot juice that was coming, particularly out of the Basket Ranges and random parts of Austria, as soon as you see wild yeast, even for someone who's been working in the wine industry for almost a decade like myself, I see those, and unless I know that the producer is also using a bit of sulfur or using extended lees time to preserve those wines and make them not funky and faulty, it frightens me away from it. So I don't think that's the correct marketing buzzwords that people should be using. And I'm not in marketing, so I apologize to anyone who is, but I don't. It's not sexy talking about yeast. It's fun and it's brilliant if you're educated like us, but it doesn't romanticize, and people want to be whisked away, even if that's not the case.
Sure. No. You're absolutely right. No, this is, you've almost written my speech for me now. But so I'm honoured that I'm like, wow, I've written all my notes here. I feel very got plenty to work on now. But sorry to go back. So this is a slightly contentious slide, because there is a group of producers in Marlborough who are worried that this explosion in Marlborough, they're slightly worried that some of the bigger producers are shipping or taking it in those flexi tanks, filling up a shipping container with a plastic bag, pumping it full of wine and shipping it off to be bottled. The eco credentials are, this is a great thing, cuts down on having to ship bottles and glass and all that around the world. But they're slightly worried that they're sort of losing that unique point that is Marlborough, if you like. So Appellation Marlborough Wine was set up. So they're an independent group of people, and I put the sign, the things, they've come up with this map, which I thought when I first looked at it, I thought, well, is it from the 1800s? Because it's got that sort of, Pirates of the Caribbean kind of look about it. But what they're trying to show is that if you look at that map there, you can see the green, which is this, the Waro, and then we see the long dark green finger going all the way to the upper Waro, which you talked about. And then over on that far, far left at sort of 9 o'clock, that's St Arnaud, where the St Arnaud Lakes, which you talked about. And then they've got the fingers coming down, that sort of slightly lighter green, which is the southern valleys, the sort of clay soils. And then you're up and over the range, and then you've got the sort of yellow, the Ouatteri, which is places like Blind River and what have you, which is there. I will see, David, if I can get them to download this so that we can have a slightly better example of it, because the last bit it's got is this southern coast. So the State Highway 1 that you can see there, so the road that goes down bisects Ouatteri and Blind River and then carries down, that's the main state highway, and therefore there are new plantings in that sort of southern coast, so which would not have been there even, I don't think, 10 years ago or 12 years ago, but they would be there now. So this is try and focus on the producers who are doing, or trying to safeguard, if you like, as they see it, the region. So the wines have to come from Marlborough, because I was looking at the GI regulations, and it's like any other thing. Even if it says it comes from Marlborough, you can put 15% in from, I don't know what the percentages in Australia, but for us it's 15% can come from somewhere else. So I think sometimes when you look at the Pinot Gris or something, you might get a little tiny bit coming into some of the blends, maybe to give a bit of flesh or what have you. But for a appellation Marlborough wine, it's got to come from Marlborough. They've got to have some sort of yield limit. It goes through a tasting panel. It's got to be bottled in New Zealand and all this kind of thing to try and safeguard, if you like, the fact that or slightly distance the people who are keen on safeguarding the quality levels in Marlborough, because it is, you know, Sauvignon is a great variety that will crop quite you know, keen levels, shall we say. So my feeling was that they probably should have gone for like the VDP in Germany and have gone for must wait rather than tons to the hectare, because you can crop Marlborough Sauvignon quite high, but I think that if you brought it down and said you can only, you know, it's got to reach a certain potential must weight and therefore alcohol level, I think that might have been a way to go. But still, it's at the moment I think it's just Sauvignon Blanc that they're thinking about extending it slightly into other grape varieties, but I think that they've had, you know, they want to see how they could do with Sauvignon before they did anything else. So they have a little symbol, which I think you can see if I flick back. The one they see on the bottom on the left-hand side, AMW, there's a sort of sticker that you can put on the bottles now. So it would be worth, if you were looking or promoting your wines, because, or buying a wine, because I think that would be definitely a sort of another level, if you like, of
May I make a slight cynics comment on that one, on the last slide? Sustainable viticulture, and the wine must be bottled in New Zealand, and yet, as we know, it's an export. Shipping and bulk cuts out a lot of the carbon and whatnot. So, like, I get it, but at the same time, then you're bottling in New Zealand and shipping it to the UK in bottle. So, you know, you're helping yourself on one hand, but cutting yourself off at the other hand.
Yeah,
Exactly.
great point. I think they just felt that, you know, once it's left here, then who knows what's going to happen to it on the other side of the world. It was more a question about that, but I think that's a very valid argument. But I think here, 96, or was it 97% of all vineyards are sustainable, so maybe they put that in because, you know, they didn't want to put things. But no, I take your point that that's a valid argument. But I think it was just maybe a response as well to the bigger producers who they thought were doing that, shipping in flexi tanks. Do you know what I mean? So it was a kind of way to exclude them, if you like.
Of course, I spent too much looking at supply chain stuff today at work, so yeah, I just picked up on it. Anyway, let's move on.
No, that's a very good. My God, you've all got rapier-like knowledge, haven't you? And I've yeah. So they are making, so for Pinot, Marlborough leads everybody else as well by some considerable distance, and they've really worked hard on their Pinot profile, I think, recently, because they felt very much that they were being left behind because there was so much focus, if you like, on Sauvignon Blanc from the region, and then they would always be slightly disgruntled that anybody never mentioned them for Pinot. But I sort of tell people you make it then, haven't you? You can't just sit there making it and not telling people you're making it. So it was, they've definitely, there's a Pinot safari every February when you go to the region. People are advised to go to it, and then they take you around all those southern valleys, sort of up and driving up and down there, seeing about vineyard site and you know, seeing if there are, can you see differences between the Waihopai and the Brancott and the Amaka and what have you. So again, they would be, I would think of all the regions of New Zealand making Pinot, the greatest range of wines would be in Marlborough, just by function of the fact that there's lots of it being made. So I would say from there you would get the high cropping, wines that are intended to be just Pinot, juicy, fruity Pinot Noir, very little oak on them, the kind of fairly lightweight tannins, but for sort of immediate consumption, through to the people who are making the very first bottle was the Dog Point Pinot. So that would have been made by Murray with all the techniques. He's a sort of Burgundian, devotee, if you like. So I think in New Zealand we're not trying to make Burgundy, but we can definitely be inspired by the wine. So that maybe the expression of whole cluster. Maybe I think probably in Central you probably see more, or Martinbury you may see more whole cluster than you do in Marlborough. But the cold soaking, to get the colour, the Guy Akkad method, and then the typical fermentation, and then I think probably slightly less oak than we would have seen. Maybe it says 9 to 18 months. I think 18 months is pretty fulsome for Marlborough Pinot. I think it will be normally much less than that, and bigger format oak. So you're seeing, kind of hogsheads or puncheons, maybe slightly older oak at the same time, not maybe the toast of the barrel size that we were seeing in years gone by. I think there's a sort of definitely a reining back of that, which again is helped by a function of vine age, isn't it? If you're getting plenty of tannin and concentration, you probably can build structure into the wines from that point of view, and you only need some oak. You don't need to necessarily then drown the things in oak. But I think there's some really, they age particularly well, especially those ones from the Southern Valleys. So I think our Terry Pinot is probably a little bit more, I mean, it's a very lovely examples, but it's slightly more in that kind of cranberry, rhubarb. See, when I say herbaceous, people think I mean unripe, and I don't. But, that sort of more lifted, redder fruited, crisper red fruit kind of characters, whereas for that density and maybe that slightly darker fruit profile, then you're looking way more at the Southern Valleys, I would suggest. There's what else is happening. Having just been to, as I said, to Austria, I've been a few times, but I would say that the sooner that we can snuff out the spectre that is Marlborough Gruner Veltliner will be a day not too soon for me, between you and me. I'm sure there's a couple of decent ones out there, but how anyone ever thought that grape variety would do well in Marlborough is I just don't even begin to wonder. Albarino is doing really well, so obviously tiny volumes, but it just, well, you'd imagine if you came from Galicia by the sea, so there's no reason why Marlborough couldn't make the same. So we're seeing Albarino is looking pretty good. There's lots of different grape varieties. You just mentioned Pinot Gris, Riesling, what have you, but there is some Merlot grown there. There's very little Cabernet, a little bit of Syrah, depending on whether you like that sort of very lifted, greener, green peppercorn, sort of red fruited spectrum. But there's some really beautiful examples coming out that as well. But I think that there's never going to be, well, not in my lifetime anyway, a sea change to there being anything else when Sauvignon Blanc is just such a focal point, if you like. And that's it. I think then if I click on the end, you'll see the end of me. Oh no, God, there's another one. I can't see. I'm literally doing this blind. So Marlborough Pinot, we've just said there. So what do we see here? Again, well, the diurnal variation that you see in almost all the other ones. And they said clay soils of the Waiaro, and then those Southern Valleys. If you ever get a chance to come here, Market is where the aerodrome is, the old one, and that's where Peter Jackson has got his aircraft museum. So it's a fascinating, rather than go to one of those dusty old museums where they've sort of put relics around there, the Weta Workshop have made all of these different models, really spookily realistic giant ones. There's one where one of the planes looks like it's crashed slightly and there's a sort of pilot hanging out of it. I don't know, I thought it was fascinating. So if you come to visit the vineyards of Marlborough, try and have a morning to go to the Market Aerodrome and have a poodle around there. And then I said at the bottom, so there's a spectrum. So from that red fruited, bright, juicy deliciousness, right through to those richer, more impactful styles from the Southern Valleys. Well, that was the end. I thought, phew, 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 phew. So no, I like Marble Pinot very much. I think there's lots of joy to be had there. Now I've got to try and find you all, haven't I? No, that's the end again.
Yeah, well, that was great. Now, does anyone have any questions? I know that Natalie, I think Simon and Gianni, you still have wines you were drinking you didn't talk about. Did you want to
Yeah.
mention what you were drinking tonight, Gianni?
Yeah, I've got a Merlot from Hawke's Bay. It's Oyster Bay.
You enjoying that?
It's all right. I'm actually not usually a big fan of Merlot, but because I'm tasting this wine, I'm also doing a tasting note right after this class. So I wanted to get a different wine from a different region each time. So I'm looking forward to next week, which I'll be having a Pinot Noir from Central Otago, which is an excellent region for that.
Can I say that the Oyster Bay will be made by delegates, and I've got both two of the winemakers from delegates on my diploma course, and they're both from the Ukraine, and they couldn't be lovelier if they tried. They're based in Blenheim, but I went. They had a Ukrainian thingy over in Vienna, and grape varieties I'd never heard of. To be honest with you, they were slightly scary. But even when you drink that wine, and Merlot may not be your thing, but you are supporting two people who've escaped something grisly. To be honest with you, and they're awesome. Two girls who were here and really very lovely. So go you.
Well, it's not really that bad actually. I'm fine with it. It's, you know, other Merlots I've had I haven't enjoyed as much, but this is not bad.
Yeah, no, good on you. That's what you can ask for, isn't it? Something sort of delicious to drink and, another day over.
Yeah.
David?
Natalie, did you want to talk about your wine? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm drinking a Takaranga John Martin Pinot Noir from Martinborough.
Oh, fine.
It's a 2021 vintage, so still a little young, and very fresh, but there's definitely some structure in there, and the savoury note we've been talking about tonight, really quite delicious.
Well, the person who made that is married to the daughter of the chap who owns Esserangi. There you go. Welcome to New Zealand. Everybody's either married to, sister of, best friends to, or their dog from, and then everybody's the same. So he used to be the wine maker at Neudorf, and then he's moved back over. He's a lovely chap as well. So everybody seems to have chosen wines made by nice people tonight. So excellent choices all round.
Well, that's good to know, because a very good friend of mine, his godfather, cousin, whatever, is the original owner of Aotearangi. So, there's all this. Well, he's originally from New Zealand as well, but yes, as you say, 1 degree of separation, so to speak.
When I go back to London after China, and people always say to me, why do you always keep going like that all the time? And I'm like, because you never say anything without looking over your shoulder. Because the minute that you say, oh my God, did you see her hat? It was monstrous. You look round and she'll be standing right behind you with the said hat on. So I'm always checking over like that, just in case they've loomed up behind me. I can never, the last time we went there, we were getting the plane in Heathrow, and this lady just looked at my husband and burst into tears and gave him a massive hug, and they had a chat. And I said afterwards, well, who was that? And he said, she was my first girlfriend. And I'm like, oh, and he said, we were 5. That is like a billion years ago. And I'm like, how can you remember who you hugged when you were 5? But I'm like, wow, it's just a bizarre, weird. And I'm married to one of them, so what does that say about me? Never mind. Right, I'm going to love you and leave you. Thank you, David, as usual, for being so lovely. And next week we've got North Canterbury, Waitaki, Central Otago. I knew there was one I was missing. I'm like, there's one out there somewhere which I've forgotten. We will meet again.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Jane.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Have a good week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
And none of us can turn it off. We're all frantically trying to leave.
Did you get a wine in the
Thank-
end, Jane?
Oh dear. Oh, that's so funny.
No, I don't think she did. All right. Good night, guys.
Bye.